Hi, Assalamualaikum, and a very good day to everyone. My name is SARA WARDINA binti IBRAHIM, and I'm from AS2031A. So, I to welcome all the audiences today for the assignment I've been tasked to do. So, my topic is about the persuasive speech, which should voting be mandatory? I welcome all the eminent listeners and guests from all over the UITM students from different walks of life who have come here to what I'm going to share my knowledge and vast experience with the community. Before we go any deeper, let me enlighten you on what are voting and what are the concepts, how does it work, and so on. So voting is the word which means voting is a method for a group such as meeting or an electorate. In general, there are two types of votes, where are the two main forms of majoritarian system, which one conducted in a single election using rank voting and the other one using multiple elections to successfully narrow the field of candidates. Both are primarily used for single-member constituencies. As everyone knows the meaning of how it works, everyone can conduct the vote by their own, whether it's informal or informal situation. For example, we want to select the food for our class and year party. In that case, how can we decide the food and make everyone satisfied with the decision made? Apply the voting system in the class, so everyone in the class must participate in the voting, so that it can guarantee the fairness in the process. Besides, the decision is made. In fact, everyone is happy and satisfied and no fighting in the class. See how great the power of voting and why it should be mandatory in our country. So, should voting be mandatory? In other words, compulsory voting means that candidates have to address the needs of all the voters. If voting were voluntary, the experience of countries like the United States that poorer and less educated people would tend not to vote. This would skew the political system toward all the well-off and well-educated. Voting is how politicians hear from their constituent. He explained, if only about 50% of people are participating, it means political will be listening more to some people than others. Many people say that requiring citizens to vote would let more Malaysians' voices be heard. Voting is currently compulsory or mandatory in about 25 countries, including Argentina, America, Belgium, and the list goes on. Plus, supporters of that idea say voting is one of our civic responsibilities. Everyone should be required by law to vote. Democracy doesn't work if a large portion of the population doesn't participate. Mandatory voting is the best way to encourage politicians to focus their attention on all Malaysia, not just the middle and upper classes, because wealthier Malaysians are more likely to vote. Government policies are disproportionately geared toward their interests. Unfortunately, the people who most often fail to vote are the ones who are already left behind: the poor, the unemployed, and the less educated and homeless. If voting were mandatory in Malaysia, people will be inspired to pay more attention to campaigns and current events. Compulsory voting will also allow candidates to spend less time getting voters to the polls and more on explaining where they stand on the key issues. Voting is more than a right, it's a responsibility. If Malaysians want their government to truly be of the people, by the people, and for the people, everyone has to go to the polls on election days, stated by Lisa Hill, Professor of Politics and International Studies, University of Adelaide, Australia. The government shouldn't force people to vote. Doing so will flood the poll with millions of uninformed voters. Some Malaysians know a lot about politics, economics, foreign affairs, and current events. Others know hardly anything. Requiring uninformed people to vote would be like forcing them to fly an airplane or perform surgery without training. Elections have high stakes. Our vote help influence matters of war and peace, poverty and prosperity, justice and injustice, not just in Malaysia, but all over the world. Bad decisions at the polls can result in devastating wars, damaging laws, and disastrous economic policies. Some people argue that voting is a civic responsibility. In my view, Malaysians who choose not to vote can exercise their civic duties in other ways, such as volunteering to help their communities or serving on a jury. But if they do vote, they owe it to themselves and others to be informed about the issues on the ballot. Furthermore, having a right to do something doesn't mean you should be required to do it. For instance, we have the right to write novels or do science experiments, but it would be a violation of our individual freedom if the government forced us to do those things. Why should voting be any different? There are better ways to fix low voter turnout in Malaysia. One option is to make it easier for people to register to vote. We could also lengthen the hours the polls are open or have an election day on a weekend instead of a weekday. Such changes will be more effective and more democratic than forcing people to vote whether they want to or not. Stated by Jason Brennan, Professor of Strategy, Economics, Ethics, and Public Policy, Georgetown University, Washington, D.C. Let me share with everyone what are the benefits of mandatory voting. So there are 6 of them. First, which citizenship, duties, and rights. Voting is a necessary part of the duties of citizenship, just like jury duty or paying taxes. Secondly, legitimate representation. Compulsory registration and voting increase the legitimacy of elected representatives. Candidates winning seats in parliament really do win a majority of the people votes. Third, political education. Compulsory voting increases the political education of the people. They will tend to pay more attention to politics if they know they have to vote. Fourth, choice. Compulsory voting does not force a choice. People can always lodge a blank or spoil ballot paper. Number 5, bias. Compulsory voting means that candidates have to address the needs of all voters. Last but not least, the responsiveness. Compulsory voting keeps the Malaysian political system responsive to the people. New parties and candidates who lack wealthy backing can contest elections without spending large sums of money just to get the voters to polling booths. Allow me to stress on why it is important for all citizens to vote. The law does not require citizens to vote, but voting is a very important part of any democracy. By voting, citizens are participating in the democratic process. Citizen votes for leaders to represent them and their ideas, and the leaders support the citizen interests. Compulsory voting is the only really reliable and decisive means by which to raise turnout. Voting is not just any duty, it is a special duty because the existence and proper functioning of representative democracy depend on its performance. So too do our welfare and rights. When democracy functions well, rights are more secure. Compulsory voting seems illiberal because it violates one conception of liberty, negative liberty, but because it enhances other conceptions of liberty such as non-domination, autonomy, and positive liberty, it can be reconciled with liberal values. That was such a long explanation for me. Thank you for giving your time and ears. And once again, thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's times.